We begin with breaking news. An American soldier on active duty has been arrested in Hawaii on terrorism charges. The FBI accuses 34-year-old Ika Kang of providing material support to ISIS.
U.S. officials say this American soldier swore allegiance to ISIS and offered to provide the terror group with military documents and military training. The investigation started more than a year ago and included the FBI and the U.S. Army. Now, Kang is active duty and stationed in Hawaii. He was arrested by an FBI SWAT team Saturday night. His service record indicates that he was deployed to Afghanistan in 2013 and Iraq in 2011 and was highly decorated. According to officials, he was acting alone, but it is not known whether or not he made contact with the terror group. Officials say the public was never at risk. Now, he is expected to appear in federal court this afternoon in Hawaii. So far, the Army has had no comment.
Outrage is growing after this Muslim activist urged people to wage jihad on the Trump administration. Watch this.
I hope that when we stand up to those who oppress our communities, that Allah accepts from us that as a form of jihad, that we are struggling against tyrants and rulers, not only abroad in the Middle East or in the other side of the world, but here in these United States of America, where you have fascists and white supremacists and Islamophobes reigning in the White House.
And while Brits are facing up to the challenges posed by the new reality, a UK radio station recently aired 25 hours of Al-Qaeda recruitment propaganda. Its licence has since been revoked by communications regulator Ofcom. Iman FM broadcast speeches by Anwar al-Awlaki, who was killed in a US drone strike in Yemen back in 2011. He was a radical American Muslim cleric of Yemeni origin. The UN Security Council states that he was a leader, recruiter and trainer for Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. He's also suspected of having had links directly to the 9/11 plot. Now, Iman FM says it was unaware of the radical content of the speeches. Chris Hunter again says communities must do more to tackle the promotion of radicalism.
25 hours of evil hatred and vitriol, and it went unmonitored. And crucially, I'm not for monitoring all broadcasts, but somebody gave these people a license, presumably, if they weren't broadcasting illegally.
Run, hide, tell. That's the message of a new campaign video released by British police last Friday. The video shows holidaymakers at a resort having to make a decision between running or hiding after they hear gunshots before armed police storm the building. Now, counter-terrorism police in the UK say there is no specific intelligence that British holidaymakers will be targeted this summer, but the launch of the film and supporting information is part of a general campaign to raise awareness among the public.
No more scenes like this. That's the Australian government's aim as it starts a 3-month gun amnesty. The manager of this Sydney cafe and a customer were killed. It happened after 18 people were held hostage during a standoff back in 2014. The gunman used an unregistered shotgun to terrorise his victims.
The government wants to make sure that what happened here will never happen again. Fighting terrorism is at the heart of this amnesty, but there's also concern over the rising number of unregistered firearms. It's estimated there are 260,000 illegal guns in Australia.
It's feared many of the weapons are falling into the hands of organised crime networks. The government wants to stem the supply of firearms. There was a huge response to the last amnesty and buyback in 1996 after a gunman killed 35 people at a tourist attraction in Tasmania. Unlike last time, there's no money being offered in this amnesty. The Australian gun lobby say it's unlikely to reduce crime.
If you're offering up an amnesty for people who have a criminal inclination to come and hand in a firearm, what is their motivation for doing that? If they've acquired a firearm illegally, they clearly intend to use it for criminal purposes. They're hardly likely to just line up at the police station and surrender that firearm.
A group of Muslim leaders have continued their tour of European cities to condemn terrorism. Their message, not in my name. We want to pay tribute to these victims and to say no to the barbarity of these criminals. Our Islam does not belong to this minority. It takes us hostage. It also recruits our children. We have to take Daesh head on, and there's a risk, obviously. The tour started in Paris on Saturday. Belgium's Interior Minister welcomed the group. I think this is a strong signal that comes from the Muslim community themselves, and we've always said the greatest majority of Muslims don't accept these terrorist acts, and they certainly do not justify them. Today, all the imams together have shown that this is the truth, that they may be the first victims of everything that happens. The 60-strong group will return to Paris on Friday for the conclusion of their journey, where they'll be joined by religious leaders from other faiths.
Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel has been facing criticism for choosing Hamburg as the G20 host city. 3 consecutive nights of riots and unprecedented violence rocked several districts as world leaders gathered for talks last week. The country's president says Germany hasn't witnessed such brutality in years.
We have not had violence of such magnitude at demonstrations in Germany in recent years. There were apparently some who acted ruthlessly and destructively against police forces and also against the property of ordinary citizens.
Well, German police were out in force, but over 20,000 of them struggled to contain protesters, with hundreds of officers left injured. Security forces in Hamburg face criticism for failing to cope with the chaos of the rallies. This video shows violent protesters in black masks throwing chairs and fireworks through shop windows, with apparently no sign of any police officers to contain the march. Reflecting on the G20 summit, the US president has tweeted that after a significant deal on Syria, it's time to move forward and work with Russia. But he may even be facing opposition to that from his own aides and officials. The US ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, has claimed that, quote, everybody knows Russia meddled in the US presidential election, appearing to contradict Donald Trump's view that no one is sure.
I think it was Russia, but I think it was probably other people and or countries, and I see nothing wrong with that statement. Nobody really knows. Nobody really knows for sure.
Everybody knows that Russia meddled in our elections. Everybody knows that they're not just meddling in the United States elections. They're doing this across multiple continents, and they're doing this in a way that they're trying to cause chaos within the countries.
Well, following the G20 summit, Trump also tweeted that he and the Russian president discussed the creation of a special working group on cybersecurity. The idea, however, was roundly criticized on the basis of Russia's alleged hacking activities. Former US Defense Minister Ashton Carter even thought he could see an old Soviet ruse behind the leader's proposal.
You know, the Russians pulled out the old playbook. I've seen all this going back to Russian and Soviet days. When confronted with something they've done wrong, ask for U.S. intelligence. Old trick.
Striking back 7 months on, press reports from Russia say it's poised to expel around 30 US diplomats and freeze some US assets in a retaliatory move against Washington. Quoting a Russian Foreign Ministry source, the Izvestia newspaper says it's over failure to reach an agreement on 2 Russian diplomatic compounds in the US seized by the outgoing Obama administration in December last year. That was punishment, along with the expulsion of 35 Russian diplomats for Moscow's alleged hacking of the American presidential election. The Kremlin's denials of wrongdoing were repeated in person last week by President Putin during his G20 talks with President Trump. Talk followed, albeit short-lived, of the countries tackling cybersecurity together. But as Trump and his family face fresh claims of collusion with the Kremlin, Putin's patience over the non-return of the Russian compounds looks to be wearing thin. Last year, Moscow didn't retaliate, hoping for improved relations under Trump. That, though, may be about to change.
Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko says the visit by US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson to Kiev is a powerful show of support From Washington, accompanying Tillerson was Kurt Volker, special representative to the Minsk peace process. Poroshenko welcomed that appointment, adding that Volker will stay in the Ukrainian capital for several days to speed up coordination between the United States and Ukraine. In the joint news conference with Poroshenko, Tillerson spoke of the need to reinvigorate the Minsk peace process.
I've been very clear in my discussions with Russian leadership on more than one occasion that it is necessary for Russia to take the first steps to de-escalate the situation in the east part of Ukraine, in particular by respecting the ceasefire, by pulling back the heavy weapons and allowing the OSCE observers to carry out their responsibilities.
Seeking a roadmap to NATO membership, Ukraine has rolled out the red carpet for the head of the military alliance. President Petro Poroshenko has pledged reforms by 2020 to meet the requirements. Russia is unimpressed, warning that Ukraine joining NATO would not boost stability and security in Europe. It's none of your business seems to be NATO's message.
NATO will continue to support Ukraine on the path towards a close relationship with NATO, to implementing reforms and to meeting NATO standards. And then the message is that whether Ukraine is going to become a member of NATO or not is for the allies and Ukraine to decide. No one else has the right to try to veto such a process.
For 20 years, NATO's had a partnership with Ukraine. It takes many forms, including drills like this. NATO's provided Kiev with equipment to uncover the perpetrators of a cyber attack that hit Ukraine in June and spread globally.
Well, it was thought delegates at the G20 might have spent time considering what to do next about the crisis on the Korean Peninsula, with the rhetoric ramping up between the North and the US.
The era of strategic patience with the North Korean regime has failed. Many years, and it's failed. And frankly, that patience is over.
I give the highest honor to our respected great leader, Kim Jong-un, who made our country a powerful nuclear giant, having the most powerful intercontinental ballistic missile.
The United States is prepared to use the full range of our capabilities to defend ourselves and our allies. One of our capabilities lies with our considerable military forces. We will use them if we must.
Our respected leader, Kim Jong-un, said that the U.S. would be unhappy to witness North Korea's strategic power on its Independence Day and called for frequently sending big and small gift packages.
Well, when it comes to nuclear arms, North Korea and the US are far from equally matched. Pyongyang still doesn't have any missiles capable of sending warheads over considerable distances. The furthest they've ever managed is 930 kilometers, which is nowhere near the range of US warheads.
North Korea's intercontinental ballistic missile, once fully developed, would be able to hit a U.S. naval base in San Diego, some 9,700 kilometers away. That's the assessment of John Schilling, a researcher at the Aerospace Corporation in California, who is also an expert on North Korean missiles. In an analysis posted on the North Korea monitoring website 38 North on Monday, Schilling said Pyongyang's Hwasong-14 ICBM would be able to reach the west coast of the United States with a 500-kilogram payload. He added the regime's missile has a detachable payload shroud that could hold multiple payloads or a single warhead, and decoys and penetration aids aimed at getting past U.S. missile defenses. However, he noted that in order to load multiple warheads on the missile, North Korea would have to master the technology required to reduce the weight and size of the warheads, something that will take time.
Pakistan has destroyed 2 Indian military posts and killed 4 Indian soldiers, according to the Pakistani military. The clash happened right after the country protested against India's violation of a ceasefire. According to the Pakistani Foreign Ministry, 5 Pakistani civilians were killed, and the country has asked the UN to mediate. Arch rivals India and Pakistan intermittently exchange fire on the line of control, despite an agreement in 2003 that a ceasefire should be observed along the working boundary.
The United States, India, and Japan have begun their annual joint military drill off the coast of India. The maritime exercises, known this year as Malabar 2017, kicked off on Monday in the Bay of Bengal. They will focus on anti-submarine warfare and aircraft carrier operations, as well as on-land training in Chennai. This is the second year Japan officially joined the annual drill, and the first the three nations all sent carriers to the region for their maneuvers. According to the U.S. Pacific Command, the exercises are aimed at addressing the threats to maritime security in the region.
The U.S. and Russia have finally been successful in negotiating a ceasefire in southern Syria. The question for Israel is now what the new agreement will mean for Iran and Hezbollah.
ישראל תברך על הפסקת אש אמיתית בסוריה, אבל אסור שהפסקת אש זו תאפשר את התבססותן הצבאית של איראן וגרורותיה בסוריה בכלל ובדרום סוריה בפרט. בשבוע שעבר שוחחתי בנידון שיחות מעמיקות עם מזכיר המדינה טילרסון ועם נשיא רוסיה, יותר נכון, ולדימיר פוטין. שניהם אמרו לי שהם מבינים את עמדותיה של ישראל ושהם יתחשבו בדרישותינו. אנחנו מצידנו נמשיך לעקוב אחר המתרחש מעבר לגבולותינו, תוך עמידה איתנה על הקווים האדומים שלנו. מניעת התעצמות חיזבאללה דרך סוריה, בדגש על הצטיידות בנשק מדויק, מניעת התבססות קרקעית של חיזבאללה ליד גבולנו, או התבססות של כוחות איראנים, ומניעת התבססות צבאית איראנית בסוריה כולה.
Israel is wary of the possibility of a 2 or 3 front war involving forces in Lebanon, the Golan Heights, and possibly Iran.
Israel has unveiled a plan to boost the lives of the nearly 2 million people living in the Gaza Strip. It wants to build an artificial island off the coast of the Palestinian enclave with a cargo terminal and even an airport to connect the impoverished territory to the world. The Islamist militant group Hamas has controlled Gaza for much of the past decade, but Israel says it's perceived as being responsible for Gaza as it's largely the only lifeline to it.
Without endangering Israel's security, the artificial island.
Israel says the €5 billion scheme will boost Gaza's economy and ease humanitarian concerns. Hamas has not commented on the plans, while the Israeli cabinet is described as divided over the project.
Electricity and gas installations, as well as logistics centers, will be built on the island.
Some of Europe's largest energy companies have warned the US against imposing new sanctions on Russia. Charlotte Dubinsky has more on that.
Well, this is about a pipe that's due to be built from Russia right the way through to Europe, ending in Germany, and supplying a lot of the energy needs to the EU countries. And what's happened is that some of the CEOs of some of the energy companies in Europe have slammed these new threats of sanctions against this pipeline project by the American US Senate, saying that it's unacceptable that they should be trying to meddle in EU policy.
The principle of American sanctions on a project that is not in U.S. does not involve U.S. actors, that it's not in dollars. It is an interference in the affairs of European countries, and that is unacceptable.
The proposed sanctions not only affect Russia, but also Europe and Germany. I appeal to all parties involved not to turn the project into a pawn of global politics, and to leave the problem of Europe's energy supply to Europeans. It is unacceptable that European energy policy is now being made in the US.
Qatar has threatened to leave the Persian Gulf Cooperation Council in case Saudi Arabia and its allies failed to lift the blockade imposed on Doha. In a letter to the GCC Secretary General, Doha has demanded a series of conditions so as not to withdraw from the bloc. Foreign Minister Mohammed bin Abdurrahman Al Thani says Qatar will not negotiate on its sovereignty. He said Doha gives a 3-day deadline to its blockers to lift the siege imposed on Qatar and compensate it for the political and economic losses.
Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi has claimed a full victory over self-styled Islamic State in Mosul. The last remaining militants were cleared from the city a day after it was recaptured by the Iraqi army. Relieved residents in Baghdad expressed their joy. Today is a day of honor for every Iraqi. The Iraqi flag was raised in Nineveh province and the mythical state is over. There's no place for the Islamic State in Nineveh. During the 3 years of Islamic State rule, almost 1 million residents fled the city. Many of them remain in refugee camps with no home to return to. Aid workers warned of the difficulties ahead.
But what we need to remember is that there's a very large area around Mosul and other areas in other parts of the country that have also been devastated by this conflict. So when we look at rebuilding, it's not only West Mosul that will need resources, but it's the whole area around Mosul. There are towns that were home to hundreds of thousands of people that are completely deserted.
Temer representa a retirada de todos os direitos, mas é muito maior do que o Temer. Se o Maia entrar, ele vai fazer a mesma coisa ou pior. Então hoje não é só fora Temer, é sobretudo nenhum direito a menos, porque amanhã o Senado brasileiro vai rasgar a nossa carteira de trabalho.
The head of what was once the world's biggest Bitcoin exchange stands trial in Tokyo on charges of embezzlement and data manipulation. Mark Karpeles ran Mt. Gox, which filed for bankruptcy in 2014 after losing around $500 million worth of Bitcoins. The company blamed hackers for the losses, but the French-born CEO is accused of having diverted funds to accounts in his name. He has pleaded not guilty. The collapse of Mt. Gox was a major setback for Bitcoin and other virtual currencies, which can be used for payments and traded like stocks and bonds. Japan hopes there's a silver lining to the debacle. It became this year the first country to regulate virtual currency exchanges nationwide in the hope they could help boost the economy.
We turn next to the emergency playing out across this country. 68 major fires burning tonight. Thousands of families, even young campers, escaping the fires, the children in tears. And there are red flag warnings up tonight in at least 6 states.
Tonight, with those fires ripping across California, the aerial assault. More than 6,000 firefighters deployed, some 8,000 evacuated statewide. The Alamo fire north of Santa Barbara consuming 45 square miles. The nearby Whittier fire engulfing this highway. The blaze so fast it trapped a group of 90 campers and 50 counselors over the weekend.
They had flames directly in front where they could not access these children.
A bulldozer finally breaking through to kids like 9-year-old Finnegan McQueenie.
We're in the car and we drove straight through the fire. There was these trees super high that were exploding.
With towels on their heads and tears in their eyes, they were bussed to safety.
I'm gonna go see if my house is still here.
Michael Lopez taking our Marcy Gonzalez along.
It didn't burn the field, but it burned my house, my God.
His fiancée crushed, their home gone.
It was 56 years of memories.
David, even though what you see behind me is wildland, it is still the focus of much of firefighters' efforts here, because behind those flames and that column of smoke is what's called communications peak. And if that burns, then nearly all the communications in all of Santa Barbara County go down.
The violent thunderstorm and torrential rains that pounded the French capital were unusual for the month of July. Nearly 50 millimeters of rain fell in just 1 hour, the equivalent of an entire month of rain. The downpour affected nearly 24 metro stations, some of which had to close due to flooding. Between 9 and 11 p.m., emergency services received 1,700 phone calls and intervened on 37 occasions, mainly to pump out flooded basements. Earlier in the day, the French city of Nantes bore the brunt of the storm. Traffic came to a standstill as streets and major thoroughfares flooded, the result of a storm that barely lasted half an hour. Here, emergency services responded to 265 calls. No casualties were reported. Central France and the Paris region will remain on high alert until Tuesday morning.
Heavy downpours have hit Jiangda County in China's Tibet Autonomous Region. Water levels have exceeded the banks in some rivers. One residential building on the edge of a river collapsed. It's still unknown whether there are people trapped inside. Authorities are taking precautions in the face of continuing rain. Many residents have been evacuated to safety.
Did you see this at Joint Base Andrews over the weekend? Turbulence blowing the dress blue cap off one of the Marines' heads. Well, the president walked over to pick it up, put it back on, and it blew off again. But, you know, a lot of folks think that's very classy that the commander-in-chief would stop and try to help the gentleman in service to our country. A nice gesture.
Good effort.